Let's get a little closer look at this fuel pump here. And we're going to disconnect the wiring harness and the hoses. What we got here is two connectors. This top one here has a little lock that you just pull up on. Pull up on that, wiggle a little bit, take it loose. The second one here has a little two-step lock. What it has is this little slide bar here. Slide that out. Then it will allow you to depress the lock and the top of it down. Then you should be able to remove the connector, just like that. I'm gonna pull that out of the way. Next, we got three hose connections here. Now these two don't require any special tools. You just squeeze the little tabs on the bottom, pull the little lock up, just like that, and just simply disconnect it, just like that. Same thing on this one here. Now before I disconnect that one, that's our high pressure fuel supply coming out. So I'm gonna stuff me a rag under that so I can catch any fuel that comes out. There again, it comes loose the same way. You just pull the little lock up. You just ease that right off the end of the hose connection, just like that. And there we got a little bit of fuel coming out, not much. That's why we got that rag there to catch it. So let's catch as much of that fuel as we can. All right, then we'll move on to this one here. Now this one, you're supposed to have a special tool that slips in there and retracts the barbs that holds it in place. I don't have a special tool, so what I'm just going to use is a little pick tool here. Just going to ease in here with a pick tool, retract those barbs. There we go. And just disconnect that. All right, that's got all of our connections taken loose. Next we'll take the lock ring off and then we'll work on pulling the pump out. Okay, next we're going to remove the lock ring, and as you can see it's got these little tabs here under it, so we need to move the lock ring in that direction. There's several little old notches in that lock ring all the way around so that you can facilitate getting that off. Now what I'm going to use here, this is a brass drift punch, and the reason why I'm using brass is since we do have fuel and vapors and things like that around there, we don't want to use something that's going to cause sparks. So I'm going to take my brass drift here, and it's going to take a ball peen hammer, kind of knock that around. There we go. Now we'll lift that lock ring up. And we'll remove that. Now as you can see here, there's quite a bit of dirt and grit and stuff that was hiding under that lock ring. So before I break the seal on this fuel pump, what I want to do is I want to blow that remaining dust and dirt and stuff out of there. But before I do that, I'm going to take me some shop towels. I'm going to cover up the ends of my fuel hose connections, so that way we'll lessen the chance of maybe blowing some of that grit and dirt into those fuel lines. Now I'm ready to remove the fuel pump. I got me a 5-gallon container here handy. When I lift that out of there, I'm going to try to drain as much of the fuel out of it as I can, but as I go to remove it, I'll put it over into this bucket here so we don't have any fuel spilled all over the place and cause us a fire hazard. Yeah, my fuel tank's about full, so this thing's got a lot of gas in it. Now once you get that fuel pump out of there, take you a few minutes to wipe this sealing area down here where the O-ring goes. Just be real careful that you don't wipe any of that dirt over into the fuel tank. Now is also a good time to take you a flashlight and actually look down inside that tank. Make sure you don't see a bunch of trash and debris down in there. And if you do, then the best thing to do is get you a little hand pump, pump all the fuel out of there, wipe that tank out real good, get it good and clean, then we'll get ready to drop this new fuel pump in place. I've got our new fuel pump and our old fuel pump here, and what I'm doing is I'm taking a few minutes to look at the connections on here and make sure we have the exact same connections on our new fuel pump. There are several different variations of the fuel pumps that goes on different trucks depending on the model. And I was a little leery about that when I went to my local parts store because they asked me all kinds of questions about different configurations on it. So it doesn't hurt to take just a few minutes, check that pump over real carefully, make sure everything lines up. Looks like we've got the same number of connections and they're basically pointing in the same direction. Have the same number of electrical connections and the same number of pins inside those electrical connections. Okay, yeah, looking pretty good there. Also, our fuel pump came with a new O-ring, so let's go ahead and install this rascal. Something else you want to check too is your wiring harness. I helped a buddy of mine replace a fuel pump on his truck a few years ago. We put the new fuel pump in, but the truck still wouldn't run. Come find out, the ground wire on the harness down on the chassis end had melted and it just had a poor ground to the fuel pump. So be sure and check that and repair it if necessary. Now we're going to install the fuel pump. What we're going to start with is the O-ring. Just set it down there in the groove. Make sure it's sitting in there good and square. And now we've got our fuel pump here. Now when you get your fuel pump and it comes in the box, most likely the float arm for the fuel gauge sender is not going to be attached. It just snaps into the little sender arm down here. Just take your float arm like that, go ahead and start it down in there, and ease the fuel pump down. Lower it on down in there. Now as you lower this fuel pump down into the tank, you've got an alignment tab here that fits between the dogs on the locking ring on the fuel tank. So when you drop that down in there, set it in between those dogs, but also make sure that you're lining it up with your plastic fuel lines so that you be sure to have that in the right orientation. Just get it lined up and ease it on in place just like that. Then you want to take your lock ring, which is the original lock ring. I cleaned it up real good, make sure it didn't have any dirt on it. We'll put that back in place. Just like that. Then we're going to take our drift punch and we're going to roll that until it's fully seated onto the engagement dogs on the fuel tank. Here's a little more detailed shot of that fuel pump installed there. Now as you can see, I just have that locking ring just started on there. Now what we're going to do is we're going to drive that locking ring, we're going to turn it clockwise until this little notch right here is locked in amongst these engagement dogs here. And also you'll have the slot on the lock ring we bottomed out on the dogs. Then we'll go ahead and connect our hoses and our electrical connections. Here's another close-up of that ring with it locked in place. As you can see, our lock dog is bottomed out on the ring, and then the little lock tab on the ring itself is engaged into the notch that's in that dog right there, and that kind of locks that thing in place. So I'm going to reconnect the hoses. What I'm going to do is take these little protective caps off the ends of the connectors and just slide the hoses on there. Push the lock in and then pull it out and make sure it's got a good engagement on there so it's on there good and snug. Do the same thing with your remaining ones. Now this large connector here, it just simply plugs in until it locks. Then just pull back on it, make sure you got a good connection there. And we got our last one here. Same way, just push it in fully, push down the lock, and then pull back on it, make sure she's got a good tight fit. Okay. Now we'll move on to the electrical connections. We got our wiring harness here. Now just before I plug this wiring harness back in, we'll take me a little bit of dielectric compound, and we'll put some on the ends of the connectors. Just like that. Then just snap those back into place. And just give them a little tug, make sure you got them plugged in good. All right, there we go.